In the grand theater of history, very few civilizations have commanded the stage with the enduring power and profound influence of ancient Egypt. This was not merely a kingdom, it was a world-shaping force for over 3,000 years. It was the beating heart of a bygone era, a center of power, spirituality, and economy whose influence spread across the Mediterranean and deep into Africa. This civilization rose from the dust, nourished by the steady, generous flow of the Nile. And it was this river that taught them about the rhythm of life, of death, and of rebirth. They built magnificent structures, monuments so vast that even with our modern technology, we still struggle to fully understand how they were made. Each stone tells a story of ambition, of faith, and of a deep understanding of engineering that seems almost impossible for its time. This was a place where kings did not simply rule, they became gods. Their power was not just secular, but a sacred trust, a bridge between humanity and the divine realm. Along the banks of the Nile, entire cities rose and fell, their fates tied to the rhythm of the annual flood. And perhaps most astonishingly, it was here that death itself was re-engineered. It was not an end, but a doorway. A doorway, a meticulously planned journey with the ultimate goal of cheating eternity. In the Egyptian worldview, mortal life was just a brief prelude to a far more glorious and everlasting existence. Every grain of sand here hides a story. Some stories we know, carved in stone and written on papyrus, but countless others are still waiting, buried beneath the veil of time, for the day they might be discovered. Tonight, we will step into that world together, a world of mesmerizing contrasts. From the glittering light of a solid gold burial mask to the long and silent shadow of the Sphinx at sunrise, from lost cities buried beneath the desert to the stars that once guided the Pharaohs. What we are about to explore are 100 fragments of a great civilization, a civilization that refuses to fade with time. This is not just a journey into the past. It is a dialogue with eternity itself. This dialogue begins with one of their most complex and sacred rituals, the process of mummification. Preserving the body for eternity was an art, a science, and a profound act of faith. This process was never rushed. It required patience and precision, lasting for up to 70 days. This was a symbolic period of time, a transition phase between two worlds. It was not just a technical procedure, it was a strategic rite, designed to ensure the survival of the soul. The first and perhaps most crucial step was the removal of the internal organs. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were carefully taken out through a small incision. They were seen as the seat of worldly desires and needs, things unnecessary in the eternal life. After their removal, they would be preserved separately, cleansed, and placed in sacred containers known as canopic jars. Meanwhile, the empty body cavity would be cleaned with palm wine and fragrant spices before being packed with linen or sawdust to maintain its shape. Then the most critical phase began, the drying of the body. The corpse would be completely covered in a natural salt called natron. Natron, harvested from dry lake beds, is a powerful desiccant. It would slowly draw all the moisture from the tissues, effectively halting the process of decay. This stage could last for 40 days or more. It was a sacred wait, a slow purification. Once the body was completely dry, it became lighter and firm, perfectly preserved. It was then anointed with fragrant oils and precious resins, materials often imported from distant lands, showing the importance and immense cost of this ritual. Finally, the body was wrapped in hundreds of meters of fine linen. Between the layers of cloth, small protective amulets were carefully placed, each one carrying its own specific meaning of protection. Throughout these 70 days, priests would continuously recite incantations and perform rituals. They called upon the gods, especially Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, to safeguard and guide the sacred process. This astonishingly meticulous care reflected a core belief. The Egyptians believed the body was the home of the soul, even in death, and a properly preserved form was essential for enjoying the pleasures of the afterlife, completely and forever. This profound focus on the physical body, however, was not uniform. The ancient Egyptians were highly selective in what they chose to preserve, a decision driven not by biology, but by a deeply held philosophy about the nature of the soul. In their view, not all organs were created equal, and while most were removed and preserved separately, one was considered so vital, so central to a person's identity, that it was almost always left untouched. This was the heart. In stark contrast to our modern understanding, the Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the very center of thought, memory, and emotion. It was seen as the essence of a person, the vessel that held their character, their intentions, and their complete moral record. In life, the heart was the bridge connecting the physical and spiritual self.
In death, its role became even more critical. It was the key witness in the final judgment. Therefore, during the meticulous process of mummification, all internal organs were removed except for the heart. It was left in its place, anchored within the chest as the spiritual core of the deceased. If the heart was accidentally damaged during the procedure, a sacred stone amulet, often shaped like a scarab beetle, would be put in its place to perform its function. To lose one's heart in the afterlife was unthinkable. It meant losing one's very identity, a spiritual annihilation more terrifying than death itself. This belief shaped everything, from their medicine to their religion, making the heart one of the most revered and protected parts of the human body. It was the indelible record of a life lived, the scroll upon which all deeds, good and bad, were written. But this reverence for the heart created one of history's great ironies. While they preserved the seat of emotion with such care, they treated the organ of intellect with startling dismissal. The brain was removed because it was thought to be utterly useless in the afterlife. Despite their otherwise meticulous preservation of the body, the ancient embalmers saw the brain as an unimportant secondary organ. They believed it played no role in thought, personality, or memory. Those were the exclusive domains of the heart. This belief was so ingrained that the removal of the brain was a standard, almost casual part of the mummification process. Embalmers would use long hooked tools, inserted through the nose, to break through the thin ethmoid bone. They would then carefully liquefy the brain tissue and drain it out of the skull. Once the cranial cavity was empty, it was rinsed out, sometimes with palm wine, and then packed with resin-soaked linen or molten resin to maintain the shape of the head. This practice was performed with such consistency that very few mummies have ever been found with their brains intact. From a modern perspective, this is a profound loss. By discarding the brain, the Egyptians unknowingly deprived modern scientists of a potential treasure trove of information about their health, their diet, and their genetics. Yet, to them, preserving the brain was simply unnecessary. It was seen as little more than cranial stuffing. What truly mattered was the heart, the body's recognizable outward form, and the spiritual protections needed to navigate the challenges of the underworld and live forever. This wasn't a scientific error in their eyes, it was a spiritual priority. In their quest for eternity, they made a strategic choice, betting everything on the moral purity of the heart, while the complex universe of the mind was simply washed away. It is a powerful reminder that a civilization's definition of the self, of what makes a person who they are, can be fundamentally different from our own. Written in a symbolic language where the heart, not the mind, held the final word. And so, with the body preserved and the heart secured in its rightful place, the soul was ready for its final and most perilous journey. It would travel through the treacherous landscape of the underworld, guided by spells from sacred texts, until it arrived at the threshold of eternity, the Hall of Two Truths. Here, the deceased would face the most important trial of their entire existence, the weighing of the heart. This was not a trial by jury, nor a judgment by a forgiving God. It was a cosmic audit, a moment of absolute, unassailable truth, where a lifetime of actions would be laid bare and measured. This concept was the very cornerstone of Egyptian morality. It was a powerful instrument of social order, a divine deterrent that shaped the behavior of everyone, from the lowest farmer to the pharaoh himself. The belief in this final, inescapable reckoning ensured that the principles of cosmic balance, known as Ma'at, were not just an abstract philosophy, but a daily lived reality. At the center of the Great Hall stood a magnificent scale. The god Anubis, with his serene and watchful jackal head, would gently take the heart of the deceased and place it on one side of the scale. On the other side, he would place a single, pure white feather. This was the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The feather was weightless, yet it held the gravity of the entire universe. It was the absolute standard against which a human soul was to be measured. If the heart was light, unburdened by sin, deceit, and wrongdoing, it would balance perfectly against the feather. If this happened, the soul was declared true of voice and was deemed worthy to enter the field of reeds. This was the Egyptian paradise, a blissful, eternal land of abundance, where one could live forever in a perfect reflection of the best moments of their earthly life. But if the heart was heavy, weighed down by a lifetime of crime, dishonesty, or cruelty, the scale would tip. This was a verdict of guilt, a final and irreversible failure. And the punishment was not an eternity of torment in a fiery hell. It was something far more terrifying to the Egyptian mind: complete and utter annihilation. A natural male narrator voice with a warm, friendly tone, fluid and easy to follow, like a light science podcast. Keep your voice clear and coherent with a gentle intonation that is both intelligent and soothing. Use pauses when necessary. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The tempo should be around 0.8. Beside the scale, a fearsome creature waited patiently. Her name was Ammit, the devourer of the dead. She was a terrifying composite, with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. These were the three most fearsome man-eaters known to the ancient Egyptians. If the heart was found unworthy, it was thrown to Ammit, who would devour it in a single bite. With this act, the soul would cease to exist entirely. Its memories, its identity, its very essence would be erased from the cosmos forever. This concept of non-existence was the ultimate horror, a final end from which there was no return and no appeal. Overseeing this entire solemn procedure was the god Thoth, the patron of writing and wisdom. Depicted as a man with the head of an ibis, or sometimes as a baboon, Thoth was the divine scribe. He stood with his palette and reed pen, ready to record the outcome of the judgment. His presence was a guarantee of fairness and impartiality, for he was the embodiment of knowledge and unalterable truth.
If the deceased passed the test, Thoth's written account would serve as their permanent official entry visa into the afterlife. It was a divine seal of approval. If they failed, his record confirmed their fate, a final, definitive statement of their soul's destruction. To the Egyptians, this act of writing was not mere documentation. It was a cosmic act of creation or uncreation. A truth once inscribed by Thoth became a permanent part of the fabric of reality. The scene of this judgment was so central to Egyptian belief, so fundamental to their understanding of life and death, that it appears in countless tombs and on rolls of papyrus.
The overall mood, warm, friendly, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The constant, vivid reminder to live one's life in harmony with the principles of Ma'at, for one day every heart would be weighed in the balance. The vision of the afterlife, however, was not entirely filled with solemn trials and divine judgments. It was also imagined as a continuation of life's simple pleasures. And in the quiet, painted scenes on tomb walls, we find something surprisingly and deeply human. Among the depictions of gods and sacred rituals, one recurring image is both unexpected and strangely comforting. The deceased, seated peacefully before a game board, often playing against an opponent who cannot be seen. The game was usually Senet, a popular pastime in life that held a double meaning in death. It was a game of skill. It was also a game of fate. And in the context of the tomb, it became a beautiful and elegant metaphor for the soul's passage through the afterlife. The board, with its 30 squares, represented the winding path to eternity. Some squares were marked with symbols of good fortune, allowing a player to advance quickly, just as a virtuous life might smooth one's journey. Other squares were perilous, marked as traps or obstacles, representing the challenges and dangers of the underworld. Landing on one of these could send a player backward, forcing them to repeat parts of their journey. Winning the game meant safely navigating the board and bearing your pieces off the final square. This symbolized a successful arrival in the field of reeds. By showing themselves playing Senet, the owner of the tomb was expressing a quiet confidence, a confidence in their skill to navigate the trials of eternity. But perhaps they were also expressing a simple hope. A hope that even in the afterlife, in that vast and timeless realm, there would still be moments for leisure, for contemplation, and for play. It shows us that for all their focus on gods and monuments, the ancient Egyptians never lost sight of the small human joys that make life and the afterlife worth living. This desire to secure a perfect eternity was the driving force behind their most iconic creations. And it all began with a revolutionary idea, born from the mind of a single king and his brilliant architect. Long before the word Pharaoh became the title of Egypt's rulers, a king named Djoser commissioned something the world had never seen before: a pyramid. Built around 2670 BCE, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara marked a profound turning point in global architecture. It was designed by his chief minister and high priest, a man of legendary genius named Imhotep. Until that moment, Egyptian kings were buried in relatively simple, flat-roofed structures called mastabas. These were impressive, but they were bound to the earth. Imhotep's mission was to reach for the heavens. He took the basic form of the mastaba and stacked 6 of them, one on top of the other, each level smaller than the one below. This created a towering monument that rose in a series of terraces, a literal stairway to the sky. This was not just a tomb, it was a declaration, written in stone. a statement that the rulers of Egypt were not mere mortals. They were divine, and their power was as eternal as the stone from which their monument was built.
The overall mood and friendly tone. Though it is smaller and rougher than the later, more famous pyramids at Giza, Djoser's stepped creation still stands today, more than 4,500 years later. It is a weathered but unmistakable testament to a new era of ambition. This structure was a massive economic and political undertaking, requiring the mobilization of a vast workforce and the organization of complex supply chains. It signaled the consolidation of the king's power on an unprecedented scale. He was no longer just a ruler, but the central organizing principle of the entire state. The pyramid marked the birth of a tradition, an architectural signature that would come to define the image of ancient Egypt for millennia, a symbol of its power, its faith, and its unyielding quest for immortality. This relentless quest for an ordered eternity extended beyond the tomb of the pharaoh. It shaped the very houses of the gods themselves. To the ancient Egyptians, a temple was not a place for a congregation to gather and worship. It was something far more profound. It was the literal, physical dwelling place of a god on earth. The temple's innermost chamber, the sanctuary, was where the god's statue was kept. And this statue was not treated as a mere symbol. It was treated as if it were alive. Each day, in a series of solemn and secret rituals, high priests would tend to the statue. They would wash it with holy water, dress it in fine linen, and adorn it with precious jewelry. They would offer it the finest food and drink and burn fragrant incense to please its senses. This sacred space was a realm of absolute exclusivity. Ordinary people were never allowed inside these holy rooms.
The overall mood with a warm, friendly tone, fluid and easy to follow, like a light science podcast. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The temple itself was a journey, an architectural map of the cosmos. The outer courts represented the chaotic human world. As one moved deeper inside, through halls with columns like a forest of stone, one symbolically traveled closer to the heavens. And the sanctuary itself, dark and quiet, was the heart of creation, the place where the god resided in perfect stillness. But these temples were also immense economic engines. They controlled vast areas of farmland, employed thousands of people, and functioned as state treasuries. Access to the divine was a form of power, carefully guarded by a priesthood that, alongside the pharaoh, managed both the spiritual and material wealth of the nation. The temple was where heaven and earth met, a place of divine presence and a center of immense earthly power. Just as the temples were built to reflect a perfect cosmos, the pyramids were built to be its most dazzling earthly symbols. The pyramids we see today are weathered and bare, their rough core blocks exposed to the elements. But in their prime, they were almost unrecognizable. They gleamed like immense jewels in the desert sun. Each pyramid was once encased in smooth, polished limestone casing stones, fitted together with a precision we would struggle to match today. These stones reflected the intense sunlight so brilliantly that they could be seen from miles away, appearing as pure, geometric mountains of light. This wasn't just for beauty. It was a statement of power, a psychological tool.
A natural male narrator, or for any farmer working in the fields. This dazzling beacon was a constant, blinding reminder of the pharaoh's divine status and the immense power of the state. Over the centuries, time and earthquakes dislodged many of these casing stones. Later builders, recognizing their quality, reused them for other projects throughout Cairo. Today, only a few of these perfect stones remain at the base of the Great Pyramid, a small but stunning glimpse of its original perfection. To imagine that sight 4,000 years ago is to understand their true purpose. They were not just tombs, they were beacons, meant not only to impress the living, but to serve as a brilliant, shining landmark for the soul of the king, guiding it upward to join the eternal, imperishable stars. Guarding these celestial tombs is a creature of silent, imposing majesty, the Great Sphinx of Giza. Today, it wears the same sandy color as the plateau around it, a monochrome giant blending into the landscape. But evidence suggests it was once anything but monotone. Traces of ancient pigment, particularly red, have been found on its face, hinting that the Sphinx was once painted in vivid, lifelike colors. We can imagine a powerful red face, perhaps a headdress of brilliant blue and yellow, and eyes lined with the same dark kohl pigment worn by the pharaohs. In the blazing Egyptian sun, this colossal guardian would have been a striking, almost otherworldly figure, half lion, half human, and wholly alive with color. Over the millennia, the relentless wind and sand have stripped away its painted skin, leaving the weathered limestone we see today. Yet, to imagine it in its original form is to transform it.
It changes from a silent, ancient ruin into a vibrant, powerful guardian, a magical protector watching over the pyramids, forever gazing toward the rising sun. This commitment to perfection was more than skin deep. It was built into the very foundations of these monuments. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is aligned to true north with an accuracy of less than 1/20th of a degree. This is a level of precision that still baffles modern engineers and researchers, an achievement that would be a challenge even with GPS and laser technology. This feat was accomplished by men who had no modern instruments. They relied instead on a masterful understanding of the stars. One leading theory suggests that ancient surveyors tracked the movement of two stars as they rotated around the pole star, marking the exact moment they aligned vertically to find a perfect north-south line. This alignment held a profound symbolic meaning. It was a physical manifestation of Ma'at. It connected the pharaoh's eternal resting place directly to the cosmos, to the unchanging northern stars which they saw as a symbol of eternity. The pyramid was, in a sense, not just a tomb. It was a cosmic machine, rooted firmly to the earth, yet in perfect, silent conversation with the heavens. This intimate conversation with the heavens was not reserved for monumental architecture alone. It governed the most fundamental aspects of daily life. The agricultural cycles of ancient Egypt were tied to the annual flooding of the Nile, and predicting the arrival of this flood was a matter of national survival. An early flood could catch farmers unprepared, while a late one could lead to drought and famine. The key to this prediction, they discovered, lay not on earth, but in the sky. In the overall rising of a single brilliant star, that star was Sirius, the brightest in the night sky. Each year, just before dawn in the middle of summer, Sirius would reappear above the eastern horizon for the first time in months. This event, known as the heliacal rising, almost always occurred shortly before the Nile's waters began to swell. Based on this celestial clockwork, the Egyptians built one of the world's first national calendars. It was an elegant system consisting of 365 days, which they divided into three main seasons. First was Akhet, the season of inundation, when the floodwaters renewed the land. Next was Peret, the season of growth, when the waters receded and crops were planted. And finally, there was Shemu, the season of harvest, when the bounty of the land was gathered. Each season had 4 months of 30 days each. The 5 extra days needed to complete the year were set aside for great festivals, thought to be the birthdays of the gods. This Sirius-based calendar was so remarkably accurate that it drifted only slowly over the centuries. It stands as a testament to the Egyptians' genius for blending practical astronomy with the rhythms of daily life, creating a system of order that governed everything from planting wheat to crowning kings. Just as they mapped the heavens, the Egyptians also mapped their thoughts, their history, and their sacred beliefs onto the world through a revolutionary invention, one of the earliest known systems of writing. Hieroglyphic writing emerged in Egypt around 3200 BCE, making it one of the world's oldest scripts. This was not a simple alphabet. It was a breathtakingly flexible and complex system, combining symbols that represented sounds with other symbols that stood for whole words, and still others that represented abstract ideas. This hybrid nature gave it an extraordinary depth and richness. Initially, hieroglyphs were used for monumental inscriptions, carved into the walls of temples and tombs. They conveyed both practical messages of a pharaoh's greatness and spiritual messages intended to last for all time. For the Egyptians, the very act of writing was considered magical. To carve a word in stone was to make that word live forever. Because of this power, the scribes who trained from a young age to master this skill held a high and respected place in society. They alone could unlock this sacred knowledge. Over thousands of years, the formal hieroglyphs evolved along simpler scripts, like the cursive hieratic used for everyday documents. But the profound beauty of the carved signs endured. Each hieroglyph was a tiny picture, a work of art in itself. But it was also more than a picture. It was a vessel designed to carry meaning across the vast ocean of eternity. This system was a puzzle of pictures and sounds. Some signs represented single consonant sounds, much like letters in our alphabet. Others stood for combinations of sounds or for entire concepts. A picture of a sun disk, for example, could be read as the word for day, or it could represent the sun god Ra, depending on the context. This allowed for rich, beautiful layers of meaning. A name could be spelled out phonetically, but also illustrated symbolically, and then reinforced with a final sign called a determinative, which clarified its category, such as a man, a woman, or a god. To read and write hieroglyphs, one had to master hundreds of these symbols and all the subtle nuances of their combinations. This complexity is what made literacy so rare, a skill reserved for priests and professional scribes. But it also made Egyptian inscriptions more than just text. They were a fusion of art, language, and symbolism, all in one. In ancient Egypt, religion and astronomy were inseparable. The same priests who tended to the god statues were also skilled astronomers. They observed the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars, not only to maintain the calendar, but also to determine the precise timing for sacred rituals. The very architecture of their temples often reflected celestial events. Alignments were designed so that the light of the rising sun on a solstice, for instance, would penetrate deep into the sanctuary, illuminating the god at exactly the right moment. Certain constellations were identified with specific gods, and the night sky itself was imagined as the body of the goddess Nut, arched protectively over the earth. This knowledge was guarded within the temple walls, reinforcing the deep connection between the heavens, the gods, and the divine order maintained by the pharaoh. This focus on the eternal rhythms of the cosmos was reflected in their very language. The concept of eternity was central to Egyptian thought, and they had more than one word to describe it. One of the most profound was Jet, which referred to a timeless, unchanging, and permanent state of being, the kind of eternity the gods inhabited. In tomb inscriptions, Jet often appeared alongside another word, Nehe, which described a different kind of eternity. The cyclical, repeating, and ever-renewing time, like the endless turning of the seasons or the daily rising of the sun.
The overall vision of forever that combined permanence with renewal. A tomb might promise a king that he would live for all jet and all nehe, meaning his life would be both unending and ever-renewing. To the Egyptians, eternity was not a vague idea. It was a destination, a state of being, and a promise written into the very stones of their world. This intricate vision of eternity, written in the stars and carved in stone, was not built on abstract ideas alone. It was supported by a very tangible, very earthly foundation: grain. The grandeur of the pyramids, the wisdom in the temples, and the power of the pharaohs all grew from the fertile black soil left behind by the Nile's annual flood. And from the golden seas of barley and emmer wheat that grew there, the Egyptians created the two staples that fueled their entire civilization: beer and bread. In ancient Egypt, beer was not a luxury. It was not an indulgence saved for celebrations. It was a daily necessity. It was a cornerstone of the national diet, consumed by everyone, from the laborers who built the pyramids to the pharaohs who ruled over them. This beer was very different from the clear, light beverage we know today. It was made from partially baked loaves of barley bread, which were crumbled, soaked in water, and then left to ferment naturally. The result was a thick, nutritious, and mildly alcoholic drink. It was cloudy and hearty, more like a liquid meal than a simple refreshment. It provided calories, hydration, and essential vitamins. For the vast workforce of Egypt, it was their primary source of energy. This reality gave rise to a brilliant system of economic control. Workers on state projects were often paid not in coins, but in rations of bread and beer. This created a closed economic loop. The state collected grain as taxes from farmers. It then used that grain to produce the bread and beer that it paid to its workers. This system was a logistical masterpiece. It stabilized the economy, prevented inflation, and gave the state immense power over its labor force. It was the engine that made the construction of monuments possible. Beyond its economic role, beer was also a vital part of social and religious life. It was a ritual offering poured out in temples to nourish the gods and placed in tombs to sustain the dead on their journey to the afterlife. And perhaps most importantly, it was often safer to drink than the water from the Nile, which could be contaminated. The fermentation process killed harmful bacteria, meaning even children drank a lighter, weaker version of it. Beer was sustenance, it was currency, and it was a fundamental pillar of public health. The other pillar, made from the same life-giving grain, was bread. Bread was Egypt's staple food. It was the core of almost every meal. But this daily bread came at a hidden, painful cost. The process of grinding grain into flour was done by hand, using heavy stone corns. Over time, as the stones rubbed against each other, tiny fragments of rock and sand would break off and mix into the flour. The result was bread that was always gritty, always abrasive. And over a lifetime of chewing, it had a devastating effect. The study of mummies has revealed that ancient Egyptians suffered from severe dental problems. Their teeth are often worn down, sometimes to the gum line, with evidence of painful abscesses and cracked enamel. This was not due to poor hygiene or a sugary diet, but from the very food that sustained them. Despite this, bread remained essential. It came in countless shapes and recipes, from simple flat loaves for workers to delicate cakes sweetened with honey and dates for festivals. It was often baked in large communal ovens, filling entire villages with the warm, comforting smell of grain.
Together, bread and beer formed the basic diet of nearly every Egyptian, from the humble farmer to the divine pharaoh. They were two sides of the same coin, the twin gifts of the Nile. They were the fuel that built an empire. And while this diet sustained life and allowed a great civilization to rise, it also serves as a poignant reminder of the daily hardships of the past, where even the simple act of eating could slowly and painfully grind down a smile over the decades. At the very top of this highly organized, grain-fueled society stood a single towering figure, a figure who was both the foundation of the state and its highest peak: the pharaoh. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was so much more than a ruler. He was the living embodiment of divine power. He was seen as the son of the sun god Ra, and the earthly manifestation of Horus, the great falcon-headed god of kingship. This was not a metaphor. It was a political and spiritual reality that shaped every aspect of life. The pharaoh's authority was therefore absolute, not because of military might alone, but because it was divinely ordained. To question the pharaoh was to question the gods themselves. It was an act of both treason and sacrilege. This dual identity gave the pharaoh a monumental responsibility. He was in charge of maintaining Ma'at, the delicate cosmic order that kept the world in balance. This was his primary duty. He had to ensure the sun would rise, the Nile would flood, and the harvest would be plentiful. He was the single essential link between the gods and the people. If he succeeded, Egypt would prosper. If he failed, chaos would surely follow. In life, he was this sacred bridge. And in death, he would become fully divine, shedding his mortal form to join the other gods in the afterlife. This belief was reinforced everywhere, in the grand rituals performed in the temples, in the towering inscriptions on stone, and in the sheer scale of the monuments built in his name. The pharaoh's image, carved into a temple wall or cast in gold, was believed to hold a measure of his spiritual power. To obey the pharaoh was to honor the very structure of the universe. To visually communicate this divine status, the pharaohs adopted a set of powerful and unmistakable symbols. And one of the most distinctive royal accessories was the false beard. This was not a matter of fashion or personal grooming, it was a sacred emblem of divinity. In official ceremonies and in art, pharaohs, regardless of their age or gender, would wear a stylized, plaited beard strapped to their chin. This beard was a direct link to Osiris, the great god of the underworld and resurrection, who was always depicted with a long, narrow chin adornment. The false beards were often made of precious metal, sometimes gold, and were a clear and immediate sign that the person wearing it was not merely human. They were a god-king, ruling on earth with divine authority. The most fascinating example of this is the great female pharaoh Hatshepsut. In many of her statues and official reliefs, she is shown wearing the full regalia of kingship, including the false beard. This was not an attempt to hide her gender. It was a brilliant and strategic political move. The office of the pharaoh had a powerful, established iconography that was inherently masculine. By adopting the beard, Hatshepsut was signaling that she was not just a woman ruling, but that she was fully inhabiting the sacred and timeless office of the pharaoh. She was claiming its power, its legitimacy, and its divine connection. It was a masterclass in political branding, a sign that the power of the pharaoh transcended the individual who held the throne. This obsession with a pure divine identity extended from symbols to bloodlines. Royal marriages in ancient Egypt often followed rules that seem strange to us today. To preserve the purity of the divine bloodline and to keep power tightly consolidated within the immediate family, pharaohs sometimes married their own sisters or half-sisters.
This practice was not seen as taboo. Instead, it echoed the mythology of the gods themselves. The divine couple, Isis and Osiris, who brought civilization to Egypt, were both brother and sister and husband and wife. By mirroring this divine union, the pharaoh reinforced his own godlike status. These marriages were rarely about romance. They were cold, strategic alliances designed to ensure the throne remained within a closed, sacred circle. It was the ultimate form of political gatekeeping, preventing powerful noble families from marrying into the dynasty and creating a rival claim. While the pharaoh would still maintain other wives and concubines to produce multiple heirs, the marriage to a royal sister ensured that the principal heir would have the purest, most divine blood possible. It was another tool in the vast political and religious arsenal of the pharaoh, designed to maintain one thing above all else: the unbroken and unbreakable continuity of divine kingship. Beneath the singular divine authority of the pharaoh, there existed a complex and surprisingly modern society. And one of its most remarkable features was the status of women. In a world where many ancient cultures treated women as little more than property, Egyptian women enjoyed a level of legal rights and economic freedom that was truly exceptional for its time. Unlike in ancient Greece or Rome, which would rise to power centuries later, women in Egypt were recognized as distinct legal entities. They could own and inherit property in their own name. They could enter into legally binding contracts. They could even run their own businesses, managing estates and appearing in court as equals to men. These were not informal customs. They were established rights, recorded in legal documents that have survived for millennia. Marriage contracts, for example, often detailed the financial arrangements between husband and wife, protecting the woman's property in the event of a divorce, which she herself could initiate. This legal framework had profound economic consequences. In an agricultural society where land was the primary source of wealth, allowing women to own and manage property created a more stable and resilient economy. It ensured that family wealth was preserved and that land remained productive, even when male heirs were away at war or had passed away. This relative gender equality was rooted in the core Egyptian concept of ma'at, which emphasized balance and harmony in all things, including society itself. It was understood that both men and women had vital roles to play, not just in the home, but in the economic life of the nation. While the highest levels of political power remained largely in the hands of men, powerful exceptions always existed. Queens and high priestesses often wielded immense influence, acting as regents or shaping religious policy. This advanced legal status made Egyptian society a place of unique opportunity for women in the ancient world.
And centuries later, this legacy would be embodied by one of history's most famous and formidable rulers, the last pharaoh of Egypt, the legendary Cleopatra. Yet here lies another of Egypt's great paradoxes. Cleopatra VII, the woman often seen as the quintessential Egyptian queen, was not, by blood, fully Egyptian. In truth, she was the final product of a long line of Greek Macedonian rulers. Her dynasty, the Ptolemies, had taken control of Egypt nearly 3 centuries earlier, following the conquests of Alexander the Great. For most of that time, the Ptolemaic dynasty remained resolutely Greek. They ruled from the gleaming Hellenistic city of Alexandria. They spoke Greek, maintained Greek customs, and imposed Greek political structures upon their Egyptian subjects. They were, in many ways, a foreign elite, governing a population with whom they shared little in terms of culture or language. Cleopatra, however, was different, and her difference was a mark of her political genius. She understood something that her predecessors had failed to grasp. To truly rule Egypt, one had to become Egyptian. She was the very first ruler of her dynasty to take the time and effort to learn the Egyptian language. This single act was a powerful statement. It broke down the wall that had separated the rulers from the ruled for generations. It allowed her to speak directly to her people, to their priests, and to understand their concerns without the need for an interpreter. But she went even further. She embraced Egyptian religious traditions with a powerful public flair. In grand ceremonies, she presented herself not as a Greek queen, but as the living reincarnation of the goddess Isis, one of Egypt's most beloved and powerful deities. This was a masterful stroke of political theater. By identifying with Isis, the divine mother and protector, she was weaving her own identity into the fabric of Egyptian mythology. She was claiming an ancient and sacred authority that went far beyond the military power of her Greek ancestors. This blending of her Greek heritage with Egyptian tradition made her a unique and powerful figure. She was a bridge between two worlds. She could negotiate with Roman generals in fluent Greek, but she could also command the unwavering loyalty of the Egyptian people as their divine pharaoh. Her story is not just the tale of a charismatic queen. It is the story of Egypt's final defiant chapter of independence. A chapter written by a ruler who understood with brilliant clarity that the symbolic power of claiming Egypt's ancient identity was the most potent weapon she had in a world that was rapidly falling under the shadow of Rome. In this world, so carefully ordered by gods and kings, the divine was not confined to the temples. It was not a distant, abstract concept. The sacred walked among the people every single day, in forms that were both familiar and deeply revered. It could be found in the graceful curve of a bird's beak, in the powerful form of a bull, and, most famously, in the quiet, watchful gaze of a cat. In ancient Egypt, cats were far more than simple pets. They were sacred animals, seen as living manifestations of divine grace and protection. They were inextricably linked to Bastet, the gentle yet powerful goddess of the home, of fertility, and of security. Bastet was one of Egypt's most beloved deities. The overall mood, with a warm, friendly tone, fluid and easy to follow, like a light science podcast. Keep your voice clear and coherent, with a gentle intonation that is both intelligent and soothing. Use pauses when necessary. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The tempo should be around 0.8. She was often depicted as a woman with the head of a sleek domestic cat, or sometimes as the cat itself, a symbol of her gentle and protective nature. But she also had a fiercer side, sometimes being shown with the head of a lioness, a reminder that the same power that protected the home could also destroy its enemies. This dual nature made her a perfect guardian. Her popularity was rooted in the very fabric of Egyptian life. In a society built on grain, the cat's practical ability to control mice, rats, and snakes was a vital service. They were the silent protectors of the nation's food supply, and therefore of its very survival. This practical importance elevated them to a divine status. Nearly every household, from the humblest dwelling to the grandest palace, would keep cats, treating them not as animals, but as cherished members of the family. They were treated with immense affection and deep reverence. To harm a cat, even by accident, was considered a grave offense, a shocking act of sacrilege. This reverence was not merely a social custom. It was codified into law, with the harshest of penalties. The protection of cats was taken so seriously that killing one was a capital crime, often punishable by death. The ancient Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing centuries later, recorded his astonishment at this practice.
He recounted witnessing a mob of Egyptians riot and kill a Roman official who had accidentally run over a cat, despite the pleas of the pharaoh's own representatives. This extreme legal protection reflected the core belief that cats carried the divine blessing of Bastet. To harm one was a direct insult against the goddess herself. This sacred connection extended even beyond death.
Cats were so integral to family life that they were often mummified with the same care as humans and buried with their owners, ensuring their protective companionship would continue into the afterlife. In the temples dedicated to Bastet, thousands of cats were housed and cared for by priests. And upon their death, they were mummified and buried in vast, sprawling catacombs, offerings from faithful pilgrims. This practice was not limited to cats alone. The elegant ibis bird, with its long, gracefully curved beak, was held sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge. He was the divine scribe we met in the Hall of Two Truths, the keeper of sacred records. To honor him, Egyptians mummified ibises in staggering numbers, placing them in dedicated underground galleries. Modern archaeologists have uncovered millions of these mummified birds, each one carefully wrapped in linen and placed in a distinctive pottery jar or a small coffin. Some of these were offerings bought by pilgrims, ordinary people seeking Thoth's favor, perhaps for help in their studies or for a just outcome in a legal dispute. This mass mummification of animals reveals just how deeply animal worship was woven into the fabric of Egyptian religion. For them, these creatures were not merely symbols, they were living, breathing representatives of the gods they embodied, a constant, tangible presence of the divine in the natural world. This deep, sacred connection to the natural world was physically built into the very design of their most holy places. Ancient Egyptian temples were not placed at random. Their alignment was a deliberate, calculated act of cosmic engineering. Many were oriented so that the rising sun, on certain important days of the year, like the solstices, would shine directly down the central axis of the temple.
Its light would pierce the darkness of the inner sanctuary, and for a fleeting, sacred moment, it would illuminate the statue of the god within. The most famous example of this is the great temple of Abu Simbel. Twice a year, a beam of sunlight travels more than 200 feet into the mountain to light up the figures of the gods seated beside the great pharaoh Ramesses II. These alignments were powerful acts of devotion. They were a way of linking the steady, predictable rhythms of the heavens with the life of the temple on earth. By aligning their sacred spaces with the sun, the Egyptians were tying their worship to the daily miracle of rebirth and light. For, in the Egyptian mind, the sun was not simply a star in the sky. It was the god Ra himself, sailing his magnificent solar boat across the vast blue heavens by day. His journey was the source of all life and warmth. But when the sun set, his work was not done. Ra would descend into the Duat, the perilous and mysterious underworld. Here he began a dangerous journey through 12 distinct regions, each one corresponding to one of the 12 hours of the night. This was not a peaceful voyage. The underworld was a realm of chaos, filled with terrifying demons and challenges. And every single night, Ra had to face his greatest enemy, the colossal serpent, Apep, the embodiment of darkness and chaos, who sought to swallow the solar boat and stop the dawn from ever coming again. This was the ultimate cosmic battle, order against chaos, light against darkness. Assisted by other gods, Ra would overcome these threats each night. And in the final hour, he would be triumphantly reborn at sunrise, bringing a new day to the world. This nightly voyage was a powerful metaphor. It mirrored the cycle of life, death, and rebirth that was the very foundation of Egyptian religion. The walls of royal tombs are covered in vivid, detailed depictions of this journey. They show Ra's boat gliding through a star-filled darkness, a powerful reminder that even the greatest of gods had to pass through trials and darkness in order to rise again. This belief had a profound psychological effect. It meant that every sunrise was not just a natural occurrence. It was a victory, a daily reassurance that order had triumphed over chaos once more. And on Earth, reaching up towards this victorious sun, were the obelisks. These tall, tapering stone monuments, often set in pairs before the gates of a temple, were far more than simple architectural statements. They were powerful religious symbols. Each one represented a petrified ray of the sun, a solid, tangible connection between the earth and the solar god Ra. Their pyramid-shaped tips were often sheathed in electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, which would catch the first and last rays of the sun, blazing with a light that could be seen for miles. The inscriptions running down their sides were not mere decoration. They were dedications to the gods and celebrations of the pharaoh who had commissioned them, forever linking his name with the power of the sun. Standing tall and straight, reaching toward the sky, the obelisks symbolized stability, divine authority, and the eternal bond between heaven and earth. Many of Egypt's ancient obelisks survive to this day, a testament to the incredible skill of their creators. Some still stand in their original locations, while others have been carried far from home. The sheer durability of these monoliths comes from their construction. Each one was carved from a single, massive piece of granite, usually from the quarries at Aswan. Transporting these colossal stones, some weighing over 300 tons, for hundreds of miles down the Nile was an incredible feat of engineering, requiring immense organization and manpower. Their sacred role was so valued, and their symbolism of power so potent, that conquering rulers, from the Romans to the French, transported them across continents. They became trophies displayed in the centers of their own empires. Whether casting their long shadows on a temple courtyard in Egypt, or standing in the bustling modern capitals of Paris, London, or Rome, these ancient stones remain as silent witnesses to the power, the artistry, and the enduring spiritual vision of ancient Egypt. This incredible mastery over stone and sky, this ability to build for eternity, was mirrored by an equally intense focus on the fragile human body. For the Egyptians, the body was a temple in its own right, a sacred vessel that had to be maintained, repaired, and protected with the same diligence they applied to their grandest monuments. And just as their diet of gritty bread slowly wore down their teeth, it also gave rise to one of the world's first specialized medical fields, the practice of dentistry. The archaeological record is painfully clear. Dental health was a serious, chronic challenge in ancient Egypt. But they did not simply suffer in silence, they fought back. Evidence from mummies shows that some Egyptians attempted surprisingly advanced dental treatments. Archaeologists have found teeth that were drilled, likely to relieve the agonizing pressure from an abscess. Their medical papyri, ancient scrolls filled with medical knowledge, describe a wide range of remedies for toothaches. These included antiseptic rinses made from herbs, honey, and even beer, which was used as a base for many medicines. They even experimented with replacement teeth, though it remains unclear if these were functional prosthetics or simply ceremonial additions made after death. While their understanding of dental science was limited, these early attempts reveal a culture that was pragmatic and experimental. They saw a problem, and they used the knowledge they had to find a solution. It was a recognition of the importance of oral health, especially in a society where spoken rituals and incantations held real spiritual power. This medical skill was not limited to the mouth. In the quiet darkness of tombs, archaeologists have uncovered complete sets of sophisticated surgical tools.
Finely crafted bronze scalpels, sharp needles, sturdy forceps, and delicate probes have been found, carefully stored for use in the afterlife. These instruments suggest that physicians in ancient Egypt were skilled in practical, hands-on surgery. They treated the brutal injuries that were common in a life of hard labor and occasional warfare. The medical papyri describe procedures with remarkable clarity. They speak of stitching deep wounds, of setting broken bones with splints, and of lancing and draining infected abscesses. But surgery was never a purely mechanical act. For the Egyptians, physical and spiritual health were deeply intertwined. A procedure was often combined with magical incantations and offerings to the gods, particularly Sekhmet, the fierce lion-headed goddess of both plague and healing. This holistic approach ensured that both the body and the spirit were being treated. The overall mood of the tools themselves, elegant and functional, shows that surgery was a respected and highly organized practice. It was a sacred craft, a partnership between human skill and divine will. Their knowledge extended to a vast pharmacopoeia of remedies for common ailments. The medical papyri record hundreds of treatments for everything from splitting headaches to a problem that concerned them just as much as it concerns us today, hair loss. Their remedies were a fascinating blend of practical herbal medicine and magical belief. For baldness, they would rub concoctions made from the fats of various animals, like lions or hippos, into the scalp, while reciting prayers for new growth. For a simple headache, a paste of crushed herbs and honey might be applied to the forehead. Many of their ingredients, such as garlic, onion, and fig, are still valued today for their known medicinal properties. Though some of their prescriptions seem strange to us now, they reveal a culture that was deeply invested in the art of healing. They saw illness not as a random misfortune, but as a disruption of balance that could be treated through both earthly science and divine intervention. The line between medicine and personal care was often beautifully blurred. And nowhere is this more evident than in their use of perfumes and oils. Scent played a powerful and vital role in Egyptian life. Perfumes and aromatic oils were used for both personal grooming and sacred religious ceremonies. They were often made from local flowers and herbs, like lily and iris, blended into a base of animal fat or vegetable oil to create fragrant ointments. The wealthy would anoint themselves with these scented oils daily, a sign of status and purity. But the most prized scents, frankincense and myrrh, were considered offerings in themselves. These precious resins were imported from the distant and mysterious land of Punt, revealing a vast international trade network driven by the desire for divine fragrances. Burned by the pound in temples, their smoke was believed to purify the sacred space and carry prayers up to the heavens. Perfume making was a highly skilled craft, and the recipes for certain scents were closely guarded secrets. And in death, jars of these precious oils and perfumes were placed in the tomb, ensuring the deceased would remain fragrant and pleasing to the gods for all of eternity. This devotion to scent, this belief that fragrance could please the gods and protect the soul, was part of a much larger philosophy of personal presentation. For the Egyptians, the way one presented the body to the world was a reflection of one's inner state. It was a statement of purity, status, and spiritual awareness. And so, in ancient Egypt, cosmetics were not seen as a frivolous vanity. They were a matter of health, of identity, and of profound magical protection. And they were worn by everyone, men and women, from the highest echelons of the priesthood to the laborers toiling in the fields, used makeup every single day. The most iconic element of this was the dramatic, dark pigment applied around the eyes. This was not just about creating a striking and beautiful look. It was a powerful, multi-layered shield. This eyeliner, known as kohl, was made from finely ground minerals,
most commonly a lead sulfide called galena. The dark powder was mixed with a little oil or fat to create a paste, which was then applied with a small stick, creating the classic almond-shaped outline seen in nearly all Egyptian art. Beyond its stunning cosmetic effect, the coal served several vital practical purposes. The dark outline dramatically reduced the harsh glare of the bright desert sun, acting like a pair of ancient sunglasses, protecting the sensitive eyes of boatmen on the Nile and farmers in the fields. It was also believed to be a powerful insect repellent, helping to keep away the flies that could carry dangerous eye infections. Modern scientific studies have even suggested that the lead-based compounds in the coal had an unintended benefit. They may have stimulated the immune system, producing nitric oxide, which helped to prevent and fight off common bacterial eye infections.
But for the Egyptians, its most important function was spiritual. The shape of the made-up eye was designed to echo the sacred eye of Horus, one of the most powerful symbols in their entire belief system. The Eye of Horus was a symbol of protection, of royal power, and of divine healing. By outlining their own eyes in its shape, they were, in a very real sense, wearing a protective charm on their bodies. It was a visible connection between personal beauty and divine safeguarding. The act of applying it each morning was as much a sacred ritual as it was a daily routine. This culture of ritual performance extended from the personal preparations of the living to the public expressions of grief for the dead. Funerals in ancient Egypt, especially for the wealthy, could be elaborate, emotional, and highly theatrical affairs. And to ensure the grief was expressed with the proper intensity, some families would hire professional mourners. These were typically women, highly skilled in the art of ritual lamentation. Their performance was not a sign of insincere grief. On the contrary, it was a sacred duty, a way of honoring the dead and ensuring their safe passage to the next world. These women would wail loudly, beat their bare chests, throw dust on their hair, and theatrically tear at their clothing. Their passionate displays of sorrow were designed to imitate the divine mourning of the goddesses Isis and her sister, Nephthys, who had lamented the death of the god Osiris. By reenacting this mythological grief, the mourners were helping to guide the soul of the deceased on the same path to resurrection that Osiris had taken. Their performance was a critical part of the funerary rites, a catalyst for the journey to the afterlife. The overall mood, buried with Egypt's elite, the gold, the jewels, the finely crafted objects, all of it was a powerful and constant temptation. The tombs were not just burial places, they were treasure houses, vaults filled with a king's ransom, intended to fund an eternal life of luxury. But to disturb that eternity, to break the sacred seal of the tomb, was one of the gravest crimes imaginable in the Egyptian worldview. It was far more than simple theft. It was an act of spiritual destruction. By stealing the material wealth, a robber was also believed to endanger the soul of the deceased, disrupting their eternal rest and potentially condemning them to oblivion. This made tomb robbery an act of high treason against the cosmic order. Because the crime was so severe, the punishment was equally brutal. Legal records from the New Kingdom, written on papyrus, describe the harsh fate that awaited captured tomb robbers. They faced brutal beatings, public mutilation, and very often a slow and agonizing execution, such as being impaled on a sharp stake. The state needed to make a terrifying example of them. These were not just criminals, they were enemies of the gods. And yet, the lure of unimaginable wealth was often stronger than the fear of punishment. In a fascinating and tragic twist, the very people who built the tombs were often the ones who later broke into them. They were the insiders, the workers who knew the secret layouts, the false doors, and the hidden corridors. They were betraying a sacred trust placed in them by the pharaoh himself. And despite the mortal danger and the threat of divine retribution, tomb robbery was so persistent, so widespread, that even the heavily guarded Valley of the Kings was stripped of most of its treasures within just a few centuries of its final use. To guard against this constant threat, the Egyptians employed another, more subtle line of defense. The first barrier was not made of stone or hidden traps. It was made of words. Words of power, words of warning. To protect their final resting places, some Egyptians inscribed curses on the tomb walls or on the lintels above the doorways. These were not the sensationalized curses of Hollywood films, but solemn, legalistic warnings. They promised terrible misfortune to anyone who dared to disturb the dead. The punishments they described were both earthly and divine. They threatened the loss of wealth, the failure of one's family line, and a lifetime of sickness and pain. One famous Old Kingdom tomb warns with chilling clarity. As for any man who shall enter this tomb in his impurity, I shall seize his neck like that of a bird. Others threatened a more spiritual and to them more terrifying judgment. They ensured the offender would be denied a proper burial of their own, their soul left to wander the earth forever as a restless ghost. While some modern scholars believe these curses were more of a symbolic deterrent than a genuine superstition, this view misses a crucial point.
In a society where magic, or Heka, was considered a real and tangible force, these written threats were a form of psychological warfare. They were a powerful weapon in a world where belief itself could shape reality. The presence of these curses shows just how seriously the ancient Egyptians took the security of the tomb. Even in death, they were fighting to protect their eternal peace. And yet, for all their efforts, Egypt still holds its secrets close. The desert is a patient guardian. Despite centuries of intense excavation and exploration, we have only scratched the surface of what lies buried beneath the sands. Modern scanning technology, using cosmic ray muons, has revealed startling anomalies in the pyramids and in the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. These scans show what appear to be undiscovered rooms and hidden passageways. In the Great Pyramid, a mysterious, massive void was detected in 2017, floating silently above the Grand Gallery. A space as long as a passenger jet whose purpose remains a complete mystery. It sparks endless debate. Is it a structural feature designed to relieve weight? Or is it something more? A hidden chamber, its contents untouched for 4,500 years. Vast stretches of desert still conceal entire cities, swallowed by time. And beneath the rich silt of the Nile Delta, the ruins of ancient capitals lie waiting. Archaeologists suspect that many royal and noble tombs remain completely hidden, their treasures and their histories perfectly intact. Each new discovery, no matter how small, has the potential to reshape our understanding of this incredible civilization. It is a powerful reminder that the past is not dead. It is simply sleeping. And sometimes the ancient walls themselves seem to speak in a language we have yet to fully understand. Among the millions of carved reliefs and painted scenes in Egyptian temples, there are occasional images that puzzle and challenge scholars. Strange animals that resemble no known species. Composite creatures that are not described in any of the surviving mythological texts. Some may be purely symbolic, representing abstract qualities or forgotten gods. Others might depict exotic animals imported from distant lands, which have long since gone extinct. In the great temple of Seti I at Abydos, a series of unusual hieroglyphic shapes have become famous in modern times. To some, they look uncannily like a helicopter, a submarine, and a futuristic aircraft.
While most Egyptologists are confident that these are the result of overlapping carvings, where a later pharaoh's titles were carved over an earlier set, the images continue to feed speculation. Whether they are deliberate mysteries or simple accidents of time, such images highlight the incredible layers of meaning and mystery that are still embedded in the stones of Egypt's monuments. For 14 centuries, the voice of ancient Egypt was silent. The civilization had fallen. Its temples were abandoned, and the sacred knowledge of how to read the hieroglyphs was lost completely. The pictures were there, carved on every monument, but their meaning was gone. They had become an unbreakable code. Generations of scholars, from the Arab world to Renaissance Europe, stared at these beautiful, mysterious signs and could only guess at their meaning. Egypt's grand story was written everywhere, but it could not be read. It was a lock, and for a very long time, humanity had no key. Then, in the summer of 1799, that key was found. Not by an archaeologist in a forgotten tomb, but by a group of French soldiers. The overall mood was part of Napoleon Bonaparte's army, working to rebuild an old fort near the coastal town of Rosetta. There, half buried in the ground, they found a broken slab of dark granitic stone. It was covered in writing. But this was not just one inscription, it was three. The top portion was written in the ancient pictorial hieroglyphs. The middle was in a cursive Egyptian script called Demotic, and the bottom, crucially, was written in a language the scholars could still read, ancient Greek. This was the Rosetta Stone. Its discovery was a direct result of geopolitical conflict. Napoleon's invasion of Egypt was a military campaign, but it was also a massive scientific expedition. He brought with him an army of scholars to map, study, and catalog the wonders of this ancient land. When the British defeated the French in Egypt, the stone, along with other priceless antiquities, was ceded to Great Britain as a spoil of war. This is why today it resides not in Paris or Cairo, but in the British Museum in London. But its true value was not as a trophy of war. It was as a promise. The Greek text, a decree from a council of priests honoring King Ptolemy V, ended with a vital instruction. It said that the decree was to be inscribed in all three scripts. This meant the three texts told the same story. Suddenly, the code was breakable. The race to decipher it became one of the great intellectual battles of the 19th century. For years, scholars across Europe worked feverishly, trying to match the Greek names and words to the Egyptian symbols. The breakthrough finally came from the brilliant French scholar Jean-François Champollion. In the 1820s, he was the one who finally cracked the code. He realized that the hieroglyphs were not simple picture writing. They were a complex and beautiful hybrid system. Some signs represented sounds, like letters. Others represented whole ideas. And others served as silent classifiers. With this understanding, the silence of 14 centuries was broken. The voices of the pharaohs, the priests, and the poets of ancient Egypt could finally speak again. The Rosetta Stone was more than a rock. It was a bridge across time, reconnecting the modern world with one of the oldest and richest written languages in human history. This ability to communicate, to record, and to travel was the lifeblood of the empire, and the Nile was its great highway. But sometimes boats needed to go where the water could not take them. To solve this, the Egyptians engineered and built magnificent vessels that could be taken apart, carried overland, and then perfectly reassembled. This was essential for military campaigns into lands without navigable rivers and for moving large ships past the treacherous cataracts of the Upper Nile. The most stunning example of this is the Khufu ship, discovered buried in a pit at the foot of the Great Pyramid. This 144-foot-long vessel was built from massive cedar planks, which were stitched together with rope. The shipwrights had crafted the planks to fit so precisely that they could be disassembled and rejoined without losing their strength or their watertight seal. Such versatility was a strategic advantage, keeping Egypt connected to the world far beyond its own borders. Just as they engineered wood for travel, they engineered a plant for communication. Papyrus was one of the world's first and best writing materials. It was made from the pith of the papyrus plant, a tall reed that grew in vast, dense thickets along the marshy banks of the Nile.
The process of making it was an art form. Strips of the pith were laid in two layers, one horizontal and one vertical. They were then pressed together, and the plant's own natural starches would glue the strips into a single, smooth sheet. Lightweight, portable, and durable, papyrus revolutionized record-keeping in the ancient world. It replaced the heavy, cumbersome clay tablets used in Mesopotamia and allowed for the easy creation and storage of long scrolls. Egypt had a natural monopoly on this incredible technology, and it exported papyrus throughout the Mediterranean, making it a cornerstone of ancient trade. It was the information superhighway of its day. And thanks to Egypt's bone-dry climate, thousands of these papyrus documents have survived, preserving everything from tax records and medical texts to personal letters and beautiful, intimate love poems. Among all the grand, monumental inscriptions, these small, personal poems are perhaps the most surprising treasure. Written on scraps of papyrus or pottery shards, they are playful, passionate, and often feel incredibly modern. They speak of longing, of beauty, and of stolen moments between lovers. One poem reads, "My heart flutters hastily when I think of my love for you. It does not let me walk like a normal person." They reveal a personal, emotional side to Egyptian life that is often overshadowed by the stone-faced gods and kings. They remind us that beneath all the grandeur, beneath the gold and the granite, the ancient Egyptians loved and dreamed and desired with the very same heart that beats within us today. In this world, so rich with written words and silent symbols, there was another language that spoke directly to the soul. It was the language of music. It was a fundamental force, a form of active magic with the power to heal, to bless, and to communicate with the divine. The air of the temples and palaces would have been filled with the gentle, resonant sounds of harps, the soft notes of flutes, the strumming of lutes, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of percussion instruments. Music was a bridge between the human and the divine. Certain songs and hymns were believed to call down the favor of the gods, to soothe restless spirits, or even to help a woman through the pains of childbirth. Temple musicians held highly respected positions in society. They were specialists in a sacred art, and their role was critical to the proper functioning of religious ceremonies. The goddess Hathor, a deity of love, joy, and motherhood, was also the patroness of music. Her priestesses would often play a sacred instrument called a sistrum, a kind of rattle with metal discs, whose shimmering sound was thought to pacify angry gods and ward off evil spirits. But music also flowed out from the temple walls and into the rhythms of everyday life. Soldiers marched to the beat of drums. Laborers working on massive construction projects would chant in unison, using the rhythm to coordinate their efforts, turning back-breaking work into a shared communal pulse. Music was a tool for creating order, both in the sacred space of the temple and in the practical world of human effort. Just as sound could shape the invisible world, certain images from the natural world were seen as holding the very blueprint of creation itself. And none was more powerful than the lotus flower. In ancient Egypt, the lotus was far more than a beautiful bloom floating on the still waters of the Nile. A natural, living emblem of creation, of rebirth, and of the sun. The flower's most magical quality was its daily habit. At night, its petals would close, and the flower would sink just below the surface of the water. Then, as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, it would rise again and slowly, gracefully reopen its petals to the morning sun. This simple, beautiful cycle perfectly mirrored the journey of the sun itself, and by extension, the cycle of life, death, and resurrection. This connection was woven into their deepest creation myths. In the beginning, there was only a dark, endless ocean of chaotic water called none. From these primordial waters, the very first lotus flower slowly emerged. And when its petals opened, they revealed the newborn sun god, Ra, sitting in its golden heart. The lotus was, therefore, the womb of creation, the first sign of life and order emerging from the darkness. Because of this profound symbolism, artists carved and painted lotus motifs everywhere. They blossom on temple columns, on furniture, on jewelry, and on the walls of tombs. To the Egyptians, it was a charm for regeneration and eternal life. In funeral rituals, real lotus flowers or their images were placed with the deceased, a final beautiful prayer, ensuring their own rebirth in the golden light of the afterlife. This practice of seeing the divine in the natural world is the key to understanding the most famous and fascinating aspect of the Egyptian pantheon: their gods with animal heads on human bodies. This was not a literal depiction. The Egyptians did not believe their gods were strange hybrid creatures. This was a sophisticated form of symbolic portraiture.
It was a way of expressing the complex nature of a deity by combining the familiar form of a human with the specific, powerful attributes of a chosen animal. The human body represented a consciousness, an intelligence, and a personality that was relatable. But the animal head expressed the god's primary function, its domain, or its most essential quality. Take Horus, the great god of the sky and of kingship. He was depicted with the head of a falcon. The falcon is a majestic hunter with incredibly sharp eyesight who soars high above the earth. His falcon head was a perfect symbol of his power, his divine perspective, and his role as a watchful protector of the pharaoh. Anubis, the guide of the dead, was shown with the head of a jackal. This was not a random choice. Jackals were often seen at the edges of the desert, in the very places where the Egyptians buried their dead. They were creatures of the twilight, moving silently between the land of the living and the vast, empty land of the dead. By giving Anubis a jackal's head, the Egyptians transformed this scavenger of the graveyard into a sacred, divine guardian. Thoth's ibis head linked him to wisdom, because the ibis's long, curved beak was thought to resemble both the crescent moon, a symbol of time and measure, and the reed pen used by a scribe. This fluidity of form reflected a core belief that the gods existed beyond all human constraints. They were pure power, and they could reveal themselves in whatever shape best expressed their eternal and unchanging essence. This divine assembly, a world of gods with human bodies and animal heads, was a mirror, reflecting the world the Egyptians saw around them every day. The Nile River, the lifeblood of their civilization, was not just a source of water and fertile soil. It was a place of immense power and of sudden, unpredictable danger. It was home to many crocodiles, magnificent and terrifying creatures that inspired a potent mixture of fear and deep reverence. And so they created the god Sobek, depicted with the powerful head of a crocodile. Sobek was the embodiment of the Nile's might, its life-giving fertility, and its terrifying, untamable unpredictability. He was a god of contradictions. He was believed to protect the people from the very dangers of the river he represented, but he could also unleash those dangers upon them if he was angered. To earn his favor was a matter of survival, a strategic necessity for anyone who lived or traveled along the great river.
In the temples dedicated to Sobek, this reverence took a startlingly direct form. Priests would often keep live crocodiles in sacred pools within the temple complex. These were not just animals. They were considered living manifestations of the god himself. They were pampered and adorned with gold and jewels, and they were fed the finest cuts of meat. Upon their death, these sacred crocodiles were mummified with all the care and ceremony afforded to a high-ranking human, and then buried in special catacombs. Sobek's dual nature, both life-giving and deadly, made him a complex and deeply respected deity. To the Egyptians, he was a constant reminder that the forces of nature were a power to be managed and appeased, never to be taken for granted. From the dangerous waters of the Nile, the Egyptian mind then turned to the silent, sandy edges of the desert, to the lonely places where they buried their dead. Here, another divine guardian watched over them.
Anubis, with his sleek black jackal head, was one of Egypt's most ancient and recognizable gods, and a central, comforting figure in all funerary rites. He was the great protector of graves, the divine overseer of the sacred art of mummification, and the gentle, trustworthy guide of souls as they navigated the perilous paths of the underworld. In the famous scene of the weighing of the heart, it is the steady, careful hand of Anubis that adjusts the great scale, ensuring that absolute justice is done. His presence was a promise of fairness in the final hour. Just as with Sobek, his animal form was chosen for a very specific reason. The jackal was a creature that prowled the graveyards at the edge of the desert. In a stroke of theological genius, the Egyptians transformed this feared scavenger, this potential threat to the dead, into their divine and ultimate guardian. This had a powerful psychological effect. It turned a source of anxiety into a symbol of comfort and protection. During the embalming process, the chief priests would often wear a beautifully crafted jackal mask, a ritual act that allowed them to embody the god's role, to become Anubis himself for a time, ensuring the rites were performed with divine precision. For the ancient Egyptians, his silent, watchful presence was both a comfort and a quiet warning, a reminder that the long journey to eternity required purity, truth, and a trustworthy guide. Looking up from the earth and the river, the Egyptians saw the vast, star-dusted canopy of the night sky. And to them, this was not empty space. It was the living body of the goddess Nut, arched protectively over the earth from horizon to horizon. The overall mood was often depicted as a woman whose skin was a deep celestial blue, covered in a cascade of brilliant stars. Her role was cosmic, and it was eternal. Each evening, as the sun god Ra descended in the west, Nut was said to gently swallow him. He would then travel through her star-filled body during the long hours of the night. And at dawn, she would give birth to him again, triumphantly, renewing the eternal cycle of day and night. Nut's role was not only cosmic, it was also deeply personal and protective. She was a shield, protecting the ordered world of Earth from the boundless chaos that lay beyond. And she offered the souls of the righteous dead a final, peaceful home among the stars. But not all the goddesses were so gentle. There was also Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and of healing. She was one of the most complex and fearsome deities in the entire pantheon, a true embodiment of duality. She was both a destroyer and a protector. Her fiery breath was said to create the scorching, dry winds of the desert, and her divine wrath could unleash plague and pestilence upon the enemies of Egypt. In one powerful myth, she once grew so enraged by humanity's disobedience that she began a bloodthirsty rampage, determined to destroy everyone on Earth.
She was stopped only when the other gods cleverly tricked her into drinking vast quantities of beer that had been dyed red to look like blood. She drank until she fell into a drunken sleep, and when she awoke, her rage had passed and humanity was saved. Yet, this same terrifying goddess was also a powerful patroness of medicine. Her priests were among the most skilled healers in the land.
Sekhmet embodied the razor's edge between destruction and restoration, a powerful reminder that the very same forces that could bring a life-ending fever could also be the ones to break it and bring about a cure. To serve these powerful, complex gods, to stand in their presence and minister to their needs required a state of absolute ritual purity. Within the grand temple complexes, often lying at their very heart, was an artificial lake. These were not ornamental pools. They were sacred, living bodies of water, and they played a vital role in the temple's daily life. Priests were required to bathe in these sacred waters before performing any ceremonies, washing away not just the dust of the outside world, but any trace of spiritual impurity. This act of bathing was a physical and symbolic rebirth. The lakes themselves were designed to represent the primeval waters of Nun, the chaotic ocean from which all of creation first emerged. So, to step into the temple's lake was to step back into the moment of creation, to emerge cleansed and renewed, ready to enter the ordered, sacred space of the god's home. This quest for purity extended from the water to the body itself. Temple priests followed a strict and demanding code of cleanliness, and one of its most visible requirements was the complete removal of all body hair. This was not a matter of fashion or personal preference. It was a profound statement of their unique status. Priests would shave their heads and their entire bodies, sometimes on a daily basis, to ensure they were free from anything considered unclean in the divine presence. Hair was seen as something animalistic, a part of the chaotic natural world. To remove it was to set oneself apart, to become a smooth, pure vessel, a polished instrument fit for the service of the gods. They also bathed multiple times a day and wore only freshly laundered, pure white linen. The overall mood of color was not just expressed through actions, but through a rich and vibrant palette of color. In ancient Egypt, colors were never merely decorative. They were a form of communication, a visual language imbued with deep meaning and magical power. The color blue, for example, held a special and profound significance. It was the color of the life-giving waters of the Nile. It was the color of the vast open sky and of the heavens where the gods resided. Because of this, it was intrinsically linked to creation, to fertility, and to divine protection. The Egyptians so valued this color that they became the world's first chemical engineers in order to create it. Lacking a stable natural blue pigment, they invented a synthetic one, now known as Egyptian blue, by heating sand, copper, and natron to a precise temperature. This was a remarkable technological achievement, driven entirely by a spiritual need to capture the color of the divine. In stark contrast to the serenity of blue was the color red, a color of potent and dangerous contradictions. Red was the color of life. It was the color of blood, of vitality, and of the powerful life-giving desert sun. Artists would use red ochre to paint the skin of male figures, symbolizing their strength and vigorous health. But red was also the color of destruction. It was the color of the barren, lifeless desert itself, the realm of chaos that bordered the fertile blackland of the Nile Valley. It was associated with the god Set, the embodiment of violence and disorder. In protective magic, scribes would sometimes write the names of dangerous demons or enemies in red ink, a way of using the color's chaotic power to neutralize them. This duality made red a powerful force in both art and ritual, a constant reminder that the very same forces that gave life could also, in an instant, take it away. Perhaps no symbol captured the essence of life and rebirth more powerfully than a small, humble creature, the scarab beetle. This beetle became one of the most potent and widespread symbols in all of ancient Egypt, a small but mighty emblem of cosmic order and regeneration. The beetle's most fascinating habit is the way it rolls a ball of dung across the ground. The Egyptians saw this act as a perfect earthly reflection of the sun god Ra, who pushed the great ball of the sun across the sky each day. Just as the sun was reborn each morning, the beetle's young would magically emerge from this ball of dung, seemingly born from nothing. Because of this powerful metaphor, Egyptians from all walks of life wore scarab-shaped amulets as charms for luck, for protection, and for renewal. And in death, these symbols became a vital part of one's spiritual armor. During the sacred process of wrapping a mummy, the priests would carefully place dozens of amulets between the layers of linen. Each one was placed in a specific location to guard the deceased on their perilous journey. There were ankhs for life, the Eye of Horus for healing and protection, and Jed pillars for stability. And often a large scarab amulet, known as a heart scarab, was placed directly over the mummy's chest. It was often inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, which instructed the heart not to speak out against the deceased during the final judgment. Together, these hidden charms formed a complete network of magical protection, a silent, powerful shield, ensuring the soul's safe and triumphant arrival in the field of reeds. This intricate web of magical protection, woven from symbols and spells, was not confined to the silent darkness of the tomb. It was something to be worn, to be displayed, to be carried on the body as a constant, visible shield. In ancient Egypt, jewelry was far more than simple adornment. It was a form of wearable theology, a personal statement of faith and a powerful tool for aligning oneself with the protective forces of the cosmos. Every single element, from the material to the color to the design, carried a deep and specific significance. It was a language understood by all. Gold, with its warm, unchanging gleam, was not just a precious metal. It was the color of the sun and the very flesh of the gods. To wear gold was to carry a piece of eternity, to claim a small measure of divine permanence for oneself. The brilliant blue of lapis lazuli, imported over thousands of miles from the mountains of distant Afghanistan, symbolized the heavens and divine protection. The vibrant green of turquoise brought joy and was a promise of fertility and new life. And the warm reddish orange of carnelian was the color of blood and fire, conveying vitality, energy, and courage. These materials were not chosen for their beauty alone. They were chosen for their power. The designs themselves were prayers made tangible. A necklace of lotus flowers was a constant prayer for rebirth. A natural male narrator voice with a warm, friendly tone. The overall mood should be relaxed, engaging, and comfortable, perfect for bedtime reading and space narration. The tempo should be around .8. A pectoral adorned with a falcon, its wings outstretched, invoked the protection of the sky god Horus. And the image of a cobra, the sacred Uraeus, was a symbol of divine authority and a fierce guardian against evil. This was a sophisticated system of nonverbal communication. With a single glance, a piece of jewelry could proclaim one's identity, their social status, and their personal devotion to a particular god. The wealthy, of course, wore pieces of stunning craftsmanship, made from precious metals and rare imported stones. But even the poorest Egyptians would wear simple amulets made of faience,
a beautiful glazed ceramic, ensuring that everyone, regardless of station, had access to this divine protection. In life, jewelry was a statement of one's place in the ordered world, and in death it was buried with its owner, a silent, glittering armor for the soul's long and perilous journey. This quest to create a living, tangible presence of the divine reached its artistic peak in the hands of the master sculptors. The Egyptians did not aim to create mere representations of their gods and kings. They sought to create living vessels, physical bodies that a divine or spiritual presence could actually inhabit. And to achieve this, they developed a technique that remains breathtaking to this day. They gave their statues the gift of sight. The eyes of the most important statues were not simply carved from the same block of stone. They were inlaid with painstaking precision using a variety of precious materials. Rock crystal, quartz, and polished obsidian were masterfully crafted to create an unnervingly lifelike gaze. The iris and the pupil were carved as separate pieces, set into a white backing and then polished to a high sheen that would catch even the faintest glimmer of torchlight. The overall mood so intense, so focused, that it could seem to follow a visitor across a room. This was not simply an artistic flourish, it was purposeful, powerful magic. These statues were placed in the deep, quiet darkness of temple sanctuaries and in the hidden chambers of tombs. They were a living presence, a conduit through which the god, the king, or the ancestor could see and interact with the world of the living. For a priest making an offering in the silence of a temple, or for a family member visiting a tomb, to be met by that unwavering, light-catching gaze would have been a profound and perhaps unsettling experience. It blurred the line between inert stone and living presence, making the divine both immediate and very, very real. This drive to make the divine real was also expressed through sheer, overwhelming scale. Some of Egypt's most iconic monuments, like the colossal statues of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel, were not constructed from smaller blocks. They were carved from a single, massive piece of living rock. The creation of these monolithic giants was a statement of power in itself. The process of quarrying, shaping, and then transporting a single block of granite weighing hundreds of tons was an incredible feat of logistics and engineering. It required a level of state organization and resource control that was in itself a demonstration of the pharaoh's absolute authority. The statue was not just a picture of the king. The very story of its creation was a testament to his power to command both nature and man. And sometimes these great stone giants would seem to speak. The Colossi of Memnon. Two enormous 60-foot-tall seated statues of the pharaoh Amenhotep III stand as lonely sentinels on the west bank of the Nile. In antiquity, travelers from Greece and Rome reported a strange and mysterious phenomenon. At dawn, one of the statues would emit a soft, musical hum, a single, ethereal note that would hang in the cool morning air. The Greeks, with their love of mythology, believed this was the mythical hero Memnon greeting his mother, Eos, the goddess of the dawn. It became one of the most famous tourist attractions of the ancient world. Roman emperors and poets made the long journey to Egypt just to hear the mysterious voice of the stone. Modern scientists now believe the sound was caused by vibrations, set off as the morning sun rapidly heated the dew that had collected overnight in the statue's many earthquake-induced cracks. After a Roman emperor ordered the statue to be repaired in the 3rd century CE, the singing stopped and the stone fell silent once more. Even in their silence, the colossi remain as imposing relics of Egypt's grandeur and as a monument to the timeless fascination it has always held for the world. This incredible ability to create, to build, and to endure for thousands of years was not just the product of religious faith or artistic genius. It was the result of a highly organized, deeply structured, and ruthlessly efficient state. The pyramids did not rise from the sand by magic. They were the end product of a sophisticated system of social, political, and economic engineering. The same minds that aligned temples to the sun also designed the intricate machinery of government that made such wonders possible.
At the heart of this system was the constant, unwavering pursuit of order, of ma'at, not just as a spiritual concept, but as a practical, daily reality. This meant that even in an age often defined by brutal conquest, Egypt also understood the profound power of peace. In the year 1259 BCE, after decades of costly and bloody warfare between the two great superpowers of the age, Egypt and the Hittite Empire, something remarkable happened. The pharaoh, Ramesses II, and the Hittite king, Hattusili III, signed what is now considered the world's first recorded international peace treaty. The text of this agreement, preserved in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform, is a masterclass in diplomacy. It was a document born not from a decisive victory, but from a strategic stalemate. The Great Battle of Kadesh, which Ramesses glorified on his temple walls as a heroic personal triumph, was in reality a bloody and inconclusive clash that had exhausted both empires. This treaty was their solution. It was a pragmatic recognition that endless conflict was unsustainable. The agreement promised mutual non-aggression. It established a formal defensive alliance, stating that if one empire was attacked by a third party, the other would come to its aid. And, in a clause that feels shockingly modern, it arranged for the formal extradition of political refugees. Unlike so many ancient truces, this one was built to last. It endured for decades and was eventually cemented by a royal marriage between Ramesses and a Hittite princess. A copy of this ancient treaty now hangs in the United Nations headquarters, a silent, powerful testament to the deep roots of diplomacy in human history. It shows us that even in a world of bronze swords and war chariots, there was a clear understanding of the power of written agreements to preserve peace and create a stable, predictable world order. This same impulse to create order and define power was expressed in a simple, elegant symbol that appeared everywhere: the cartouche. A cartouche was an elongated oval shape with a horizontal line at one end that completely encircled the name of a king or queen. Its symbolism was beautiful and direct. The oval represented a loop of rope, magically sealing the royal name within it, offering divine protection for all of eternity. Its use made it easy to instantly identify royal names in any hieroglyphic text, setting them apart from all other words. But it was more than a label. It was a political and spiritual statement. To have your name written in a cartouche was to be officially recognized as the legitimate ruler, the holder of the divine office of kingship. To destroy a cartouche by chiseling it out of a temple wall was considered one of the most effective ways to erase a ruler's legacy, to deny them their very identity in both this world and the next. Held in the hands of the king in countless statues and reliefs were two more of the most iconic emblems of Egyptian power: the crook and the flail. These were not just symbols of authority. They were a visual representation of the pharaoh's social contract with his people. The crook, shaped like a simple shepherd's staff, represented the ruler as the caretaker, the guide, and the protector of his people. He would lead them and keep them safe, just as a shepherd does his flock. The overall, a rod with 3 beaded strands, was a tool associated with threshing grain. It symbolized the fertility of the land, the agricultural abundance that the king was responsible for ensuring. But it also symbolized his authority. his right to command, and, if necessary, to discipline his people in order to maintain order. Together, they were a perfect summary of the pharaoh's dual role. He was the gentle shepherd and the absolute master. He provided for his people, and in return, he expected their loyalty and their labor. And that labor, the engine that built everything, was funded by a remarkably sophisticated tax system, managed by an army of scribes and overseers. In an economy that did not yet use coinage, taxes were paid in kind. Farmers owed a significant portion of their harvest to the state. Officials would travel the Nile, assessing the fields and collecting the dues in the form of grain, livestock, or textiles. This collected wealth was then redistributed. It fed the legions of workers on state projects, it maintained the temples and the priesthoods, and it supported the army that defended Egypt's borders. Meticulous records of every transaction were kept on papyrus, reflecting the incredible administrative sophistication of the system. This network of collection and redistribution was one of the central pillars of Egypt's long-lasting stability. It was the practical administrative machinery that turned the divine symbols of the crook, the flail, and the cartouche into the real, tangible power that shaped the world. This immense power, expressed in symbols and enforced by a complex bureaucracy, created one of history's greatest and most persistent myths. The image of hundreds of thousands of slaves, beaten and brutalized, hauling massive stones under a scorching desert sun to build the pyramids.
This image is burned into our collective imagination by movies and books, but it is a false one. The truth, revealed by the very evidence the Egyptians left behind, is far more fascinating and far more complex. The Great Pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by skilled laborers, free men, organized into rotating crews who dedicated a portion of their lives to these national projects as a form of civil service or as paid employees. And their wages were not coins. They were the very staples that fueled the entire civilization: bread and beer. This was a closed and incredibly efficient economic system. A typical daily ration for a worker might include several loaves of bread and gallons of thick, grain-rich beer, providing both sustenance and hydration under the desert sun. Payment in food not only ensured the workforce remained strong and loyal, but it also bypassed the need for a formal currency system. It created stability and gave the state immense control. Bread and beer were the necessities of Egyptian life, so the wages directly met the workers' needs. The archaeological evidence from workers' villages discovered near Giza has confirmed this in spectacular fashion. Archaeologists have unearthed bakeries and breweries operating on an industrial scale, churning out thousands of loaves and vats of beer daily. This was a massive, carefully planned logistical operation, the true engine that powered Egypt's most ambitious architectural achievements. This system not only fed the pyramid builders, but also underscored the central role these humble staples played in sustaining the social order. And these workers did not live in squalid temporary camps. Archaeologists have uncovered entire purpose-built settlements to house the laborers who worked on the royal tombs and monumental projects. One of the best preserved is Deir el-Medina, the village home to the artisans who constructed and decorated the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The village, with its stone houses, narrow streets, and community spaces, remains remarkably intact. It offers us a rare and intimate glimpse into the daily lives of these skilled and respected workers. Their homes contained multiple rooms, storage spaces, and even remnants of painted walls. Inscriptions found here reveal incredible details about wages, work schedules, legal disputes, and personal relationships. They were a vibrant community with their own social structures, religious practices, and a sense of permanence. These were not the crude barracks of slaves. These were the organized, well-supplied, and state-supported communities of specialists. The preservation of such sites allows historians to understand that the real secret behind Egypt's monumental achievements was not brutality. It was organization, a system that recognized the value of its skilled laborers and created an environment where they could live, work, and build for eternity. The world that these skilled artisans created, in the tombs and on the temple walls, was a world of perfect, unshakable order. Egyptian artists did not strive for realism in the way we understand it today. Their goal was not to capture a fleeting moment in time. Instead, they followed a strict and sacred set of conventions, a visual grammar designed to convey meaning and preserve an idealized truth for all eternity. For 3,000 years, the style of Egyptian art remained remarkably, almost unbelievably consistent. This was not a failure of imagination. It was a deliberate and powerful choice. The unchanging art was a mirror reflecting the state's own vision of itself, a civilization that was timeless, stable, and divinely permanent. To achieve this consistency, artists often used a grid system. The wall or the stone block would be marked with a precise grid of squares. Each part of the human body was then assigned a proportional unit within that grid. This ensured that every figure was drawn with the same perfect proportions, century after century. This system emphasized symbolic clarity over a lifelike depiction. Important figures, like gods and pharaohs, were always shown larger than ordinary people. This was not a matter of perspective. It was a clear statement of status and power, a visual hierarchy that everyone could instantly understand. These rules also dictated the famous and instantly recognizable Egyptian style of depicting the human form. It was a composite view, a combination of different angles designed to present the most complete and essential form of the body. The head was always shown in profile to capture its most recognizable outline. But the eye was depicted as if seen from the front, large and almond-shaped. The shoulders and torso also faced forward, but the legs and feet would return to a clear profile view. This was not an artistic error. It was a way of preserving the true essence of a person, a visual language that could carry their power into the afterlife through the images carved and painted in their tombs. And these images were once bursting with life. While we often see the ancient reliefs in bare monochrome stone today, they were originally painted in vivid colors. Rich reds, brilliant blues, vibrant greens, and gleaming golds would have made these sacred scenes come alive. But these temple walls were not static monuments. They were living spaces. And over the centuries, the reliefs were sometimes repainted. Sometimes this was simply to restore the fading colors. But often it was a powerful political act. A new pharaoh would sometimes have the names and even the faces of his predecessors carefully chiseled out and replaced with his own. This was a way of rewriting history in stone, a way of usurping the legacy and the divine power of a previous ruler. The layers of paint discovered through modern analysis reveal this evolving history, showing the temples as dynamic political landscapes. But this world of perfect images was not immune to the forces of time. While some art was repainted, entire cities were simply erased, swallowed by the very river that gave them life. The Nile Delta, a lush and fertile fan of land, was once home to dozens of thriving cities, busy ports, and magnificent temples. But today, many of them lie buried, hidden deep beneath thick layers of silt and sediment. Over thousands of years, the river's course shifted, and the level of the sea slowly rose, submerging these once great settlements. And now, modern archaeologists are finding them. They use ground-penetrating radar, they use underwater exploration, and they have begun to locate these lost cities.
Places like Heracleion and Canopus, which sank long ago beneath the Mediterranean Sea. Preserved in the oxygen-free environment of mud and water, the artifacts from these sites remain in a remarkable state of preservation. Colossal statues of gods and pharaohs, gold jewelry, and the simple tools of everyday life have all been brought back to the surface. Their discovery offers us incredible new insights into Egypt's vast trade networks and its deep connections with the wider ancient world. And in a more recent chapter of this story, more treasures were lost to the water. When the Aswan High Dam was built in the 1960s, a project designed to control the Nile's flood and generate electricity, the rising waters of the newly formed Lake Nasser submerged a vast stretch of southern Egypt. In an unprecedented international effort, some of the most important monuments, like the great temples of Abu Simbel, were painstakingly cut into blocks and relocated to higher ground. But many others, countless temples, ancient forts, and tombs, were left behind. Today, they lie in silence beneath the calm waters of the lake. These submerged sites are now perfect time capsules of ancient life. Their contents are potentially as well preserved as anything found in the driest desert tomb. These drowned treasures are a poignant reminder of the hard choices made in the name of modern progress, and a testament to the enduring mystery of Egypt's lost worlds. And the art of the desert tombs, we find the most direct and intimate connection to this ancient world. The Egyptians believed that a body, perfectly preserved, was essential for the soul's survival, and their skill in achieving this was nothing short of miraculous. The art of the ancient Egyptian embalmers was so advanced, so precise, that some mummies have survived for more than 3,000 years in a state of near-perfect preservation. Skin, hair, and even intricate tattoos remain clearly visible, offering modern researchers an unprecedented window into the lives, the health, and the final moments of the deceased. This was not an accident. It was the result of a sophisticated and evolving science. Modern forensic studies of mummies have revealed the incredible effectiveness of their techniques. The careful removal of the internal organs, the long, slow drying process with natron salt, and the final treatment with antibacterial resins all worked together to create an environment that was incredibly hostile to decay. The preservation is sometimes so perfect that facial expressions remain frozen in time, and injuries that a person suffered in life are still clearly discernible. This was not just a practical achievement, it was a spiritual one. It was the fulfillment of a sacred promise, ensuring that the body would remain a viable and recognizable home for the soul for all of eternity. And this sacred science was fueled by a vast international trade network. The recipes of the embalmers were a closely guarded secret, but chemical analysis of mummy wrappings has revealed their key ingredients. And many of them were exotic imports, precious materials sourced from the farthest corners of their known world. Resins from conifer trees, bitumen from the Dead Sea, fragrant myrrh from the distant land of Punt, and rich cedar oil from the mountains of Lebanon were among the most valued substances. These materials were prized not only for their powerful preservative properties, but also for their beautiful fragrance, which masked the odors of death and carried a deep religious significance. The procurement of these rare imports reveals an ancient global economy, a network of trade stretching far beyond Egypt's borders. It shows that the quest for eternal life was also a powerful economic driver. It created demand, financed long-distance expeditions, and underscored Egypt's position as a major hub of commerce. The use of these expensive foreign materials in mummification reflects just how important the preservation of the body was. No cost was too great, no distance was too far. Inside the preserved body, the four key organs, the liver,
Lungs, stomach, and intestines were also given their own form of eternal life. They were removed, treated, and placed into special containers known as canopic jars. Each jar was protected by one of the four sons of the god Horus, whose heads were depicted on the lids. A human head guarded the liver. A jackal head watched over the stomach. A baboon protected the lungs, and a falcon guarded the intestines. These guardians would ensure the organs remained safe, as it was believed they would be magically reunited with the body in the afterlife. Placed alongside the mummy in the tomb, these jars were an integral part of the journey to eternity. But preserving the body was only half the battle. The next great challenge was to protect it. Tomb robbery was a constant, terrifying threat. And so, some pharaohs devised elaborate and ingenious ways to conceal their final resting places. This began a silent, strategic war, an arms race between the tomb builders and the tomb robbers. Hidden entrances were cut into sheer cliff faces. False corridors were designed to lead nowhere. And deep shafts were dug to mislead and trap any would-be thieves. Eventually, this strategy of individual concealment evolved. During the New Kingdom, the pharaohs made a radical strategic shift. They abandoned the monumental and very obvious pyramid. They chose instead to be buried together in a secret, remote, and heavily guarded valley on the west bank of the Nile, a place we now know as the Valley of the Kings. Carved deep into the limestone cliffs, this royal necropolis served as the burial ground for nearly 5 centuries. Over 60 tombs have been discovered here, ranging from simple, unfinished pits to vast, labyrinthine corridors that descend deep into the rock. The tombs were designed to be invisible from the surface, their entrances sealed and hidden after the burial. The walls inside were covered in sacred texts, a complete guide to the underworld, a map to help the pharaoh navigate the darkness and be reborn into eternal life. And though most of these tombs were in the end discovered and robbed in antiquity, the incredible art and the sacred architecture remain, some of the most impressive in all of Egypt. The valley was a grand strategic plan to safeguard eternity. And for one king, for a brief and forgotten moment in time, that plan actually worked. For years, the British archaeologist Howard Carter had been searching the Valley of the Kings. His work was funded by the wealthy Lord Carnarvon. And by the early 1920s, after years of digging with very little to show for it, the project was on the verge of collapse. The overall mood among other archaeologists was clear. The valley was exhausted. Everything that was to be found had already been found. But Carter held on to a stubborn, almost obsessive belief that one tomb, a minor and unimportant boy king named Tutankhamun, was still out there, hiding somewhere beneath the rubble. In what was to be his final season of digging, in November of 1922, his local team uncovered a single stone step cut into the bedrock. Slowly, carefully, they cleared away the debris. The single step became a staircase descending into the rock. At the bottom was a sealed doorway. The plaster was still intact, and stamped into it were the faint but unmistakable seals of the royal necropolis. Carter knew in that moment that he had found something, but he did not yet know what. He ordered the staircase to be refilled and sent an urgent telegram to his patron, Lord Carnarvon, in England. "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley," it read, "a magnificent tomb with seals intact." When Carnarvon arrived weeks later, they cleared the staircase once more and stood before the sealed door. They opened it and found a long passageway filled to the ceiling with rubble. After days of careful clearance, they found themselves before a second sealed door. Carter, with trembling hands, made a small hole in the top left-hand corner. He lit a candle and peered into the darkness. The hot air escaping from the tomb made the candle flame flicker. For a long moment he was completely silent, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Behind him, the impatient Lord Carnarvon could stand it no longer. "Can you see anything?" he asked. Carter turned slowly, and in a voice filled with utter astonishment, he spoke the famous words.
Yes, wonderful things. What he saw was a treasure hoard unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. The tomb was small, and it was packed to the ceiling with over 5,000 objects. There were magnificent golden shrines, disassembled chariots, elegant furniture, fine clothing, intricate jewelry, and beautiful statues. There were even jars of honey and wine, meant to serve the young king in the next life. It was a complete, intact royal burial, a storeroom for eternity, frozen in time. And within the innermost chamber lay the sarcophagus, and within that the coffins. And finally, resting on the head of the mummy itself, was the most iconic artifact in all of Egypt, Tutankhamun's burial mask. It is a masterwork of ancient art, crafted from more than 20 pounds of solid gold, and inlaid with brilliant blue lapis lazuli, quartz, and colored glass. The mask portrays the serene, idealized face of the young king. But it was not just a portrait. It was a magical safeguard, designed to protect him on his journey through the afterlife. Inscribed on its back are protective spells from the Book of the Dead, a final divine shield for the king's soul. After this incredible discovery, a legend began to grow. A story that those who entered the tomb were struck down by a deadly curse. The legend was fueled by the sudden death of Lord Carnarvon from an infected mosquito bite just a few months after the tomb was opened. Newspapers around the world eagerly reported any illness or misfortune that befell anyone connected to the excavation, suggesting it was the supernatural revenge of the disturbed king. In reality, the curse was more myth than fact.
Most of the people who were present at the opening lived long, healthy lives, including Howard Carter himself, who lived for another 17 years. Modern scholars believe the deaths that did occur were likely a mix of coincidence and perhaps exposure to harmful bacteria or toxic mold that had been sealed within the tomb for over 3,000 years. The myth persists not because it is true, but because it taps into our timeless fascination with the mysteries of ancient Egypt and the romantic idea that some secrets are meant to remain untouched forever. The treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb were a breathtaking anomaly, a rare glimpse into a world that was, for the most part, meant to remain hidden. But all across Egypt, another, even vaster world of treasures lay buried, not of gold, but of fur, feathers, and scales. The practice of animal mummification was not a rare or unusual custom. It was a massive, nationwide industry, a fundamental part of the Egyptian religious economy. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, falcons, and countless other species were embalmed, not by the dozen, but by the millions. Some were beloved pets, buried with their owners to continue their companionship into the next life. But the vast majority were something else. They were living offerings. Great temple complexes dedicated to specific animal-headed gods would breed these creatures on an industrial scale. Pilgrims would travel to these temples and purchase a mummified animal to present as an offering, a tangible prayer to the god they sought to appease. The process mirrored human mummification. The animals were dried, carefully wrapped in linen, and often placed in beautifully decorated coffins or pottery jars. The necropolises where they were buried are almost beyond comprehension in their scale. At Saqqara, vast underground catacombs have been found, their corridors stacked floor to ceiling with the mummified remains of millions of ibises and falcons. It was a system of devotion on a scale the world had never seen before. And the ultimate expression of this practice was the sacred Apis bowl. The Apis was considered a living manifestation of the god Ptah, and later was linked to Osiris. A single living bull, chosen for a very specific and rare set of sacred markings, would live a life of absolute luxury in the temple at Memphis. When it died, the entire nation would go into mourning. Its body was then mummified with all the elaborate care afforded to a pharaoh. At Saqqara, a vast underground complex known as the Serapeum was built to house their remains. Here, in the silent darkness, massive granite sarcophagi, some weighing over 70 tons, were built for each sacred bull. These tombs were a testament to the high status of these animals. They were not merely symbols, they were gods on earth, worthy of royal treatment in this life and the next. This incredible devotion, this willingness to expend enormous resources on religious practice, was fueled by the immense wealth of an empire that stretched far beyond the banks of the Nile. At its height, during the New Kingdom, Egypt's power extended deep into Nubia to the south and far into the Levant in the northeast. These were not just conquests, they were strategic acquisitions. Nubia was the land of gold, and Egypt's insatiable demand for the divine metal drove its armies deep into modern-day Sudan, where they built massive fortresses to control the mines and the trade routes. The Levant, the coastal lands of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, provided a vital strategic buffer against the rival Hittite Empire. But it also provided access to crucial resources, like the great cedar trees of Lebanon, whose wood was essential for building ships and the great doors of the temples. This expansion was powered by a revolutionary military technology, which the Egyptians had originally adopted from their foreign invaders, the Hyksos. This was the light, horse-drawn war chariot. Fast, highly maneuverable, and devastatingly effective, the chariot changed the nature of warfare. It allowed archers to become mobile weapons platforms, racing across the battlefield, creating chaos and breaking enemy lines. The pharaoh himself, depicted in countless temple reliefs, would lead the charge, his bow drawn, trampling his enemies beneath his chariot's wheels. The chariot became the ultimate symbol of royal power and military might, the engine of Egypt's imperial age. And this empire, this culture, this way of life endured. For more than 3,000 years, from its unification to its final conquest by Rome, ancient Egypt remained a distinct and influential civilization. Its stability, anchored by the predictable rhythms of the Nile, allowed for a continuous cultural development unmatched by almost any other society in history. And perhaps its most remarkable achievement was its cultural resilience. Egypt was conquered many times, by Nubians, by Assyrians, by Persians, by Greeks, and finally by Romans. Yet each new conqueror, in their turn, was themselves conquered by Egypt. They adopted Egyptian customs. Foreign kings were depicted in the traditional dress of the pharaoh. They built new temples to the ancient Egyptian gods. The Greek Ptolemaic dynasty, which ended with Cleopatra, blended their Hellenistic culture with Egyptian traditions. And even the Roman emperors continued to fund the priesthoods and the temple rituals, long after Egypt had become just another province of their vast empire. Egypt had a cultural gravity that was almost impossible to resist. And so, the monuments they built still stand today. From the towering pyramids to the sprawling temples, they were designed with eternity in mind. And in a way, they achieved it. They are silent, weathered echoes of a civilization that saw itself as eternal. And as our journey through their world comes to a gentle close, let your thoughts drift, as if on the slow, dark waters of the Nile at dusk. The voices of the past grow softer now. The great monuments dissolve into shadow, and time itself seems to slow. If your eyes are growing heavy, you may rest here. Carry with you the knowledge that Egypt endures, in stone, in memory, and in the quiet, still places of the mind, where history becomes a dream. And when you wake, the wonders of the ancient world will still be waiting for you. Sleep well.